She was shoved straight into the 5-tier champagne tower. Glass-shattered liquid exploded across the ballroom, and laughter rang out. That country girl just wrecked a $50,000 display. Someone jerried her dress was soaked, her hair dishevelled, her eyes glistening, and no one cared who she was not, until the doors opened and the youngest billionaire on the Forbes list walked in, draped his coat over her and said, "The woman you just humiliated is my wife." Emily Carter stood there, trembling slightly, the cold champagne seeping through her plain ivory silk dress. The Ritz-Carlton's grand ballroom sparkled under crystal chandeliers filled with Manhattan's elite financiers and tailored suits, politicians with practiced smiles, socialites dripping in diamonds. The air smelled of wealth, perfume and entitlement. Emily didn't fit, her dress had no sequins, no flash. Her softly waved hair hung loose, untouched by hairspray or stylists. No makeup, no jewellery, just her standing quietly near the cocktail bar earlier, clutching a single glass of water she'd come as a +1 for a friend. Or so people thought. Nobody knew she was the wife of the event's biggest sponsor. Nobody cared to ask a woman in a sleek emerald gown, her nails glittering with S. Swarovski crystals, sidled up to a group near the bar where Emily lingered. She flicked her eyes over Emily's dress, her lips curling into a smirk. "Did someone forget to tell her this isn't a thrift store gala?" she said loudly, her voice cutting through the chatter. The group laughed, a sharp, practiced sound, like they'd been waiting for a target. One man, his cufflinks flashing under the lights, leaned in. "Maybe she's here for the free food. Look at her bet. She's never seen a place like this." Emily's fingers paused on her glass, her knuckles whitening briefly. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge them, just lifted her waters to her lips, her gaze steady, fixed on a distant chandelier. The group waited for a reaction, their smiles faltering when none came. The woman in the emerald gown huff-tossing her hair. But the sting of her words hung in the air, drawing more eyes to Emily's quiet figure. The night had started with whispers. A woman in a feathered gown, her lips painted crimson, leaned toward a friend and sneered as Emily passed. Who let her in? "She looks like she's here to bust tables." Emily heard it, her fingers tightening briefly on her glass. She didn't turn, didn't flinch, just kept walking her steps, steady her face. Calm. She'd grown up in a world of discipline, raised in one of the country's richest families, taught to carry herself with restraint. But restraint didn't mean weakness. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was control. She'd learned early that words didn't need to be loud to cut deep. As Emily moved through the crowd, a young man in a flashy velvet suit, his hair slicked back with too much gel, blocked her path. He held a martini, tilting it lazily as he looked her up and down. "Hey, sweetheart, you lost the staff entrances out back." He grinned, waiting for her to shrink. The people around him snickered, their phones already out, ready to capture her embarrassment. Emily stopped, her eyes meeting his for a moment. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then she spoke, her voice soft but sharp. "I'm exactly where I need to be." She stepped past him, her shoulder brushing his arm, leaving him standing there. His grin fading, the crowd murmured, some amused, others annoyed they didn't like her. Calm, it made their cruelty feel small. The ballroom's energy shifted as a string quartet began playing, drawing guests toward the dance floor. Emily stood near a marble pillar, watching couples glide past in a swirl of silk and satin. A woman in a gold-sequined dress, her voice loud from too much wine, pointed at Emily from across the room. Why is she just standing there? Doesn't she know this isn't a wallflower convention? Her friends laughed, their voices carrying over the music. One of them, a man with a smug grin and a diamond pinky ring, called out, "Maybe she's waiting for a bus to take her back to nowhere." The crowd nearby roared some clapping like it was a performance. Emily's jaw tightened, her fingers brushing the pillar's cool surface. She didn't move, didn't respond. Her silence was a wall, and their laughter crashed against it louder, angrier because it couldn't break her. "Hey, you there?" A staff member in a crisp black vest waved at her near the cocktail bar. His voice carried sharp and impatient. "This area is a mess. Can you clean these glasses already?" Heads turned. A few people smirked. Emily paused her water glass halfway to her lips before she could respond. The woman in the feathered gown stepped closer, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Even with extra staff, this place still looks sloppy. Do your job properly." Her tone dripped with a disgust, like Emily was a stain on the evening's perfection. The crowd nearby chuckled, a low, cruel sound. Emily set her glass down on the bar. Her movement slow, deliberate. She didn't say a word, just smiled, faintly turned and walked toward the hallway, her head high, her dress swaying softly. A server rushing past with a tray of hors d'oeuvres nearly collided with Emily as she reached the hallway. He stopped short, his face flushed with irritation. "Watch it! You're not supposed to be wandering around here," he snapped loud enough for nearby guests to hear. A woman in a pearl-encrusted gown clutching a champagne flute laughed sharply. "Honestly, they need to train their help better. She's ruining the vibe." Others nodded their eyes, raking over Emily's plain dress, her unadorned face. The server glared at her, waiting for an apology. Emily met his gaze, her expression calm, almost curious. Then she stepped aside, letting him pass without a word. Her silence stung more than any retort could, leaving the server muttering as he stormed off the crowd's laughter. Trailing behind him, the room kept buzzing. Oblivious people sipped champagne, clinked glasses, laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Emily slipped into the shadows near the hallway, her breath steadying. She wasn't hurt, not yet. She'd heard worse growing up in a family like hers. She'd learned to take judgment. Like a wave, let it crash. Let it pass. But the night was young and the crowd was hungry for someone to tear down. Emily wasn't here to play their game, but they didn't know that they saw what they wanted. A plain girl out of place, easy to dismiss. A moment later, a man in a sleek tuxedo hurried toward her. His face flushed. He was the senior event coordinator French with a slight accent and a nervous energy. "Madam Carter," he said, breathless, his eyes wide with panic. "I didn't recognize you. We've prepared a private VIP suite for you." The words echoed into the quiet hallway, loud enough for a few nearby guests to overhear. A woman in a glittering gown froze mid-sip, her eyes darting to Emily. A man with a Rolex, the size of a clock, stopped laughing. Emily tilted her head, her expression calm, almost amused. "Thank you," she said softly, "but I'd like to stay in the crowd a bit longer." The coordinator blinked, nodded, and skirted off clearly. Rattled the guests nearby exchanged looks, their whispers shifting. Who was she? Why did he call her madam? As Emily re-entered the ballroom, a photographer snapping candids for the event's social media page zeroed in on her. He lowered his camera, his brow furrowing, then called out, "Miss, you're in the shot. Can you step aside? We're only capturing the VIPs." The guest nearby snickered, some not even bothering to hide it. A woman in a ruby-red gown, her lips pursed in mock pity, said, "Oh, honey, don't take it personally, you just don't fit the aesthetic." The photographer nodded, already turning away, dismissing Emily like she was furniture. She stood there, her hands clasped loosely, her face unreadable. Then she stepped back, her movements graceful, deliberate, letting the camera capture the glittering crowd. A few guests clapped lightly, as if her compliance was a victory. Her eyes, though, flickered with something sharp, something they didn't see. "Hey, real quick, before we go further, can you do me a favour? Grab your phone, hit that like button on this video. Drop a quick comment below and subscribe to the channel. It means the world to keep sharing stories like this. Stories that hit you right in the heart. Thanks for being here now. Let's get back to Emily." The night rolled on and the ballroom filled with the clatter of plates and the hum of self-important chatter. Dinner was announced. and guests flowed toward their assigned tables, each one marked with gold-etched place cards. Emily followed the crowd, her steps unhurried. An usher glanced at her, then at his list and pointed her to a table near the buffet. It was tucked in a corner, half hidden by a pillar, where the catering staff sat during their breaks. The chairs were mismatched, the tablecloth slightly wrinkled. Emily sat without a word, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The staff around her, exhausted and sweaty, barely noticed her. They were too busy scarfing down food before their next shift. A woman in a sapphire blue dress sauntered by, her diamond earrings catching the light. She leaned toward her friend, her voice loud enough to carry. She must be some distant cousin from the countryside. That's the only place someone like her would be seated. Her friend snickered, glancing at Emily's plain dress, her lack of jewellery. Emily didn't look up. She just reached for a glass of water, her movement smooth, unbothered. The woman lingered for a moment, expecting a reaction, maybe a blush or a stammer. But Emily gave her nothing, just silence. The woman huffed and walked away, her heels clicking like a warning during the dinner. A waiter balancing a tray of desserts stopped at Emily's table. His face twisted in confusion. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice loud enough to draw eyes from nearby tables. "This is for staff only, guests are over there." He pointed to the glittering tables across the room where laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. A man in a tuxedo at the next table leaned back, smirking. "Wow, they're really letting anyone in these days next. They'll have the janitors dining with us." The crowd around him laughed, their voices sharp, slicing through the hum of the room. Emily set her fork down, her movements precise, and looked at the waiter. "I'm fine here," she said quietly. Her tone, even the waiter blinked, thrown off, then shrugged and moved on, muttering under his breath. The laughter lingered heavy like smoke. The dinner passed in a blur of clinking silverware and self. Congratulatory toasts. Emily ate quietly, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the faces, the gestures, the little power plays disguised as politeness. She wasn't here to network or impress. She was here because her friend had begged her to come, and because, well, she'd funded the whole damn thing. Not that anyone knew, not yet, her work as a mathematician and strategic security advisor kept her out of the spotlight. She liked it that way. Let the world underestimate her. It made her job easier. A guest at a nearby table, a woman with a platinum blonde updo and a dress that shimmered like liquid silver, noticed Emily's water glass was empty. She waved a hand dramatically, calling over a server. "Can you refill her glass? Poor thing. Looks parched. Sitting with the help?" Her voice was syrupy, laced with fake concern, but her eyes gleamed with malice. The server hesitated, glancing at Emily, who sat calmly. Her hands resting on the table, the woman pressed on louder now. "Honestly, it's so sad seeing someone so out of place. Maybe we should start a charity for her next." The table erupted in laughter, some guests clapping like it was a punchline. Emily reached for the pitcher of water herself, pouring slowly, her hands steady. She didn't look at the woman, didn't acknowledge the jeers. Her silence was louder than their noise. The evening shifted gears when the charity presentation began. A sleek projector screen descended, and Clara the bride to be took the stage in a gown that probably cost more than a car. She gushed about the foundation, her voice dripping with rehearsed sincerity. "We're here to make a difference," she said, gesturing vaguely at the crowd. "But we want to hear from you, who has ideas, who wants to share the room." Went quiet. Nobody volunteered. People shifted in their seats, suddenly fascinated by their wine glasses. Clara's smile tightened her eyes, scanning the crowd for a saviour. Emily stood, not quickly, not dramatically, just stood, her chair scraping softly against the floor. Every eye turned to her. She smoothed her dress, stepped forward and spoke. "If this foundation truly wants to create impact, it should apply AI tools to analyse global funding distribution gaps. Her voice was clear, steady, like she was explaining something to a friend over coffee. She cited specific figures to dull $3 billion in unallocated aid last year. 47% of it misdirected to low-impact zones. She mentioned regions: South Sudan, Yemen, where data could redirect resources. The room went still. Clara blinked, her mouth half open. A man in a pinstriped suit leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Someone whispered, "Who is she?" Emily sat back down, her face unchanged, like she hadn't just dropped a bomb. Moments after Emily's comment, a man in a charcoal suit, his tie loosened from too many drinks, stood up from a front row table. He clapped slowly, sarcastically, his grin wide. "Well, look at that! The nobody from the staff table thinks she's a genius." The room tittered, some guests joining his mocking applause. He turned to Emily, his voice booming. "Sweetheart, stick to clearing plates. Leave the big ideas to people who actually belong here." The laughter swelled sharp and vicious as people leaned forward, eager for her to crumble. Emily didn't blink. She folded her hands in her lap, her gaze steady, locking onto his. "Then who's funding your big ideas?" she asked, her voice soft but piercing. The man's grin faltered, his clap slowing the room, hushed, a ripple of unease spreading as her words hung there. Unanswered, the silence didn't last. The crowd recovered. The chatter returned, but something had shifted. People stole glances at her. A few leaned closer to their neighbours, whispering questions. Emily ignored them. She sipped her water, her eyes fixed on the stage where Clara was fumbling through a response. The moment passed, but it left a crack in the room's polished facade. Someone somewhere was starting to wonder. As the presentation ended, a woman in a black velvet gown, her wrists heavy with gold bangles, approached Clara on stage. She whispered something, glancing at Emily, then took the microphone. "I just learned we have a special guest tonight," she said, her smile tight-forced. "The Foundation's lead data strategist is here incognito." She paused, her eyes flicking to Emily. "Please stand, Mrs. Carter." The room gasped, head swiveling. Emily rose slowly, her expression calm, her damp dress catching the light. The woman's smile wavered, but she pressed on her. "Work is why we're breaking records tonight." The applause was hesitant, confused, but it grew. The man in the charcoal suit sank into his chair, his face pale as whispers spread like wildfire. Then came the photos. The guests were herded toward the centre of the ballroom for group shots, a sea of gowns and tuxedos posing in front of the massive champagne tower. 5 tiers of crystal flutes, each one shimmering, stacked like a fragile monument to excess. Emily stood near the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed loosely. Watching the chaos unfold, photographers barked orders. Socialites elbowed for better spots. Clara's cousin, a woman named Vanessa with a sharp jawline and a dress that screamed, "Look at me," was front and centre, tossing her hair for the cameras. Vanessa took a step back, her heel catching on the hem of her gown. She stumbled, turned, and whether by accident or not, slammed into Emily hard. Emily staggered, her shoulder hitting the champagne tower. The structure wobbled, then collapsed in a cascade of shattering glass. Champagne sprayed everywhere, soaking Emily's dress, her hair, her skin. The crowd gasped, then fell silent. A man in a velvet blazer burst out laughing. "That country girl just trashed 50 grand worth of glassware," he shouted. Others joined in their laughter. Sharp cutting. Emily stood there, drenched, her dress clinging to her skin. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face stayed steady. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with something harder, something fiercer. She didn't speak, didn't scream, just brushed a strand of wet hair from her face and stepped away from the wreckage. The crowd parted as she moved, their laughter fading into awkward murmurs. Vanessa smirked, adjusting her dress like nothing had happened. Emily walked toward the edge of the ballroom, her steps slow but sure, She pulled out her phone, dialed a number and spoke quietly. Moments later, the hotel manager appeared, a slim man in a grey suit, his face pale with urgency. He bowed slightly. "Mrs. Carter will handle this immediately." The words landed like a slap. Mrs. Carter people nearby froze their eyes, darting between Emily and the manager. Vanessa's smirk vanished a guest near the shattered tower. A woman in a lavender gown with a pearl choker stepped forward. Her voice loud and accusing. "She shouldn't even be here. Look at the mess she made." She gestured at the broken glass, her face twisted with indignation. "Someone like her doesn't belong in a place like this." The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding, others snapping photos of Emily's soaked figure. A man in a bow tie chimed in, "Yeah, kick her out before she ruined something else." Emily stood still, her hands clasped, champagne dripping from her hair. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself. Her silence was a blade cutting through their noise, making their anger feel hollow. The mood in the banquet hall seemed to shift as a man approached Emily, his posture stiff, his eyes apologetic. He was the foundation's treasurer, a grey-haired man with a reputation for precision. He leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "Mrs. Carter, your latest allocation model. It's already saved us $5 million in overheads this year." He glanced at the crowd, then back at her. "They don't know. You're the reason this foundation's even solvent." Emily nodded, once her expression unchanged, but her fingers relaxed slightly. The treasurer stepped back, his respect clear in the way he lingered as the crowd's murmurs grew louder, more uncertain. A few guests nearby overheard their faces tightening as they realized they'd misjudged her. The mood in the room shifted, but not enough to stop the next blow. A man in a double-breasted suit, one of Clara's uncles, grabbed the microphone during a lull in the program. His voice boomed, polished and smug. He gestured toward Emily to preserve the image of this prestigious occasion. "The young woman responsible for the disruption will now be escorted out." The crowd clapped politely, a few nodding in approval. A security guard started toward her, his face blank professional. Emily didn't move, didn't argue, just watched him approach, her expression unreadable. As the security guard neared a woman in a navy gown, the event's PR director rushed forward, her face pale. She grabbed the guard's arm, whispering fiercely. He stopped, confused, then backed away. The PR director turned to the microphone, her voice shaking but clear. "There's been a mistake. Mrs. Carter is our honoured guest tonight. Her contributions are the reason we're celebrating the room." Froze the applause dying in their throats. Clara's uncle gripped the mic, his knuckles white as the PR director continued, her voice steadier. "Now, her data platform caught a $10 million discrepancy last week. We owe her everything." The crowd shifted uneasy as eyes turned to Emily, who stood calmly, her head high. Then the doors swung open. Ethan Carter walked in, young, sharp-eyed, his presence like a storm cloud rolling into the room. He was the tech billionaire behind a $3 billion humanitarian foundation, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. He didn't stop a single step crossing the ballroom, his tailored coat slung over one arm. He didn't look at anyone else, just Emily. He stopped in front of her, draped his coat over her shoulders, and turned to face the room. "The woman you all just insulted is my wife." The air seemed to leave the room. He paused, letting the words sink in, then turned to the organisers. "She's also the architect of the global data platform your foundation's using tonight, and she is the sole funer of this entire event." The banquet hall fell into a stunned silence. It was deafening. Clara's uncle dropped the microphone, the feedback screeching briefly. Vanessa's face went white, her hands shaking as she clutched her purse like a lifeline. The man in the velvet blazer, who'd laughed about the champagne tower, stared blankly at his shoes. Emily stood there, Ethan's coat heavy on her shoulders, her damp dress still clinging to her skin. She didn't smile, didn't gloat, just looked at Ethan, her eyes softening shinier for the first time all night. He nodded slightly, a private gesture, and offered her his arm. She took it, and they walked toward the centre of the room. The fallout came fast. Vanessa was pulled aside by Clara's mother, her face tight with fury. By morning, Vanessa's name was trending online, not for her gown or her charm, but for a blurry video of the shove shared by a guest who'd caught it on their phone. The comments were brutal, entitled "Brat, who does she think she is, her modelling agency?" Dropped her within hours, citing reputational concerns. The man in the velvet suit, a hedge fund manager, found himself uninvited from the next big gala. His firm issued a statement distancing itself from his unacceptable behaviour. Clara's uncle, the one who'd called for Emily's removal, was quietly let go from his board position at the foundation's board. No fanfare, no drama, just consequences, swift and real, as the night wound down. The banquet hall's tech crew began resetting the stage for the final toast. One of them, a young man who'd overheard Emily's comment about I earlier approached her cautiously. He held out a small folded piece of paper, a print out of a data model she'd designed. "This saved my sister's clinic in Haiti last year," he said, his voice low but fierce. "Nobody knows it was you, but I do." Emily took the paper, her fingers brushing it lightly. Her eyes meeting his, she nodded, a faint warmth in her expression. The crowd around them didn't notice, too busy with their own damage control, but the moment burned bright. A quiet truth cutting through the night's chaos, the organisers scrambled to recover. A new champagne tower was assembled, smaller but still gleaming. Ethan stepped forward, raising a glass to my wife. He said simply, his voice warm but firm. He handed Emily a flute, his fingers brushing hers. She took it, her movement steady, and raised it slightly. The room watched silent as she sipped, no speech. No grand gesture, just her standing there, her damp hair catching the light, her smile quiet but radiant. They left soon after the limousine waited outside its engine, humming softly in the Manhattan night. Emily slid into the back seat, her dress still clinging to her skin, Ethan's coat draped over her lap. He sat beside her, his hand resting lightly on hers. The city glowed outside, neon signs, yellow cabs, the pulse of a world that never slept. Emily paused her fingers, brushing an old leather keychain in her lap. A gift from her grandmother, etched with a single word, courage. Her lips curved, a private smile breaking through. She looked out, her eyes tracing the skyline. Her silence said it all. She'd walked through their fire and come out untouched. The next morning, the headlines hit the humble woman who funds a nation's fun one. Read another called her the quiet power behind her gala blogs, dissected her work. Her math, her role in global security, people who'd laughed at her had dressed now. Shared her quotes, praising her restraint. Emily didn't read them. She was already back at her desk, crunching numbers, solving problems. Nobody else could see. The world had caught up, but she hadn't waited for it. She never had. The banquet hall stood empty now. The glass swept away. The champagne stain scrubbed clean, but the echo of that echo lingered. The way she'd stood there, soaked but unbroken. The way Ethan's voice had cut through the noise. The way she'd walked away, not looking back. It wasn't revenge, wasn't triumph. It was just truth. Finally stepping into the light, and for anyone who'd ever been judged, dismissed or shoved aside, it felt like a quiet nod, a quiet voice saying, "I see you. You're not wrong. Where are you tonight?" Drop a comment below and hit follow to join the journey through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.